So I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but there's a controversy that comes up this time of year. And I'm not talking about something you might hear on Fox News. I'm not talking about a so-called war on Christmas or whether we should say Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas. No, this is a controversy amongst people who keep the church calendar. Any of you super familiar with the church calendar? Super familiar. All right, well, let me ask this. Anybody know why we have purple paramounts? Or even what a paramount is? Raise your hand. Why do we have purple? Yeah. Yeah. Right, yeah. So we have different seasons in the church year, and the colors represent different things. We do purple as a color of preparation. You can also use blue. I'm wearing blue because I'm wearing a purple shirt. I thought, what might as well be somewhat fashionable with my stole. We do white to celebrate Christmas and Easter, and sometimes baptisms, right? We do green to recognize a season called ordinary time. It just means not the purple or white time. And we have 2 seasons of ordinary time, just to be confusing, right? So this is the season of Advent. Now, the way the purple times go, you're supposed to be somber. You're supposed to be preparing yourself for the sacred holiday. This is supposed to be a season of anticipation, and we wait upon the Lord. Right? Any of this sound familiar? And there's a lot of beauty to be had in these purple seasons. Lent is often a time that I really appreciate, being able to touch on the harder aspects of life and to look at some of the spiritual disciplines and things like many of the practices I talked about just a few weeks ago, right? So I value that stuff. But most of our culture has no idea what an Advent is. And they don't observe the season of Advent. So we're weirdos, especially the more nerdy kind of mainline Christian that we happen to be, where we're like, not only is it Advent, but I know all of the particulars about it, okay? I'm going to tell you, the history behind this paramount or this decoration or that decoration. I will say there's life to be had behind the whys. And I'm going to talk about some of the whys today. This tree over here, by the way, it's a special type of Christmas tree called a Christmas tree, which is a relatively new tradition. And there's some papers over by it if you want to know some of the history on that. It was created by members of this congregation how long ago? Anybody remember? In the 40s? Yeah, so this goes back a while. And that's one of the beautiful things about our traditions, is that they have a history to them. They remind us that we're in continuity with others. So the way this controversy around Advent is expressed is those other people celebrating Christmas already, they're doing it wrong. They're wrong. And this goes back to the Middle Ages. How dare you? How dare you? You're celebrating already? You need to wait until the 25th. You have to eat all of your Advents before you can enjoy your dessert of Christmas. And then you get 12 days of it. 12 days of Christmas, right? And then it's over on Epiphany, because the wise men finally have gotten here, right? So some of us in our history have taken this so seriously as to outlaw all Christmas shenanigans. And we had one particular notice that was shared on this. The Puritans were particularly offended by celebrations around Christmas time. They would not have this greening of the church. How dare we? They would not have Christmas trees. After worship snacks? Coffee? This is supposed to be a somber time. Why? You should be fasting, not feasting. I find this to be rather burdensome. And I've been on either side of this. I've geeked out when I was kind of new to the the Christian calendar. You know, I wanted to understand everything and kind of spend some time in it. I think we get so hung up on the wrong stuff. And here is what I mean. Oliver Cromwell, for those of you who may remember your British history, Oliver Cromwell in the 1600s, along with a massive force of Puritans, took over the British government. They took over Parliament. They got rid of James I, the king. They had a hand in bringing upon the Tudors, Henry VIII and such, until Henry VIII didn't really like Oliver Cromwell anymore. Always a problem when your best bud, the king, doesn't like you anymore. Especially since they come with authority from God, apparently. Real rough. Here's Cromwell speaking on behalf of God, and here's Henry VIII speaking, somebody's got to go. So they passed a very similar notice to what was read. And the expectation was that you could not engage in any of these shenanigans, and if you did, you weren't imprisoned, you were fined, which is one of the better consequences during this time. It could be worse. Simultaneously, you have the Pilgrims over in the United States and other Puritans who came with them, and they instill a similar rule. We talk about how the Puritans came here for religious freedom. Freedom for them to have their own governance. They wanted to run things their way. So when they see all these people Christmasing it up, they say there ought to be a law against this, and they do so. So luckily, in Massachusetts Bay Colony, it was only the law for 20 years or so. That's great. Eventually, in the 1830s, somebody in the U.S. government proposed, hey, let's never do that again, just in case. Let's make it never illegal to celebrate Christmas. But the policy only lasted 20 years. Now, the Germans eventually came in a wave of immigration into the United States. This started around the 1830s or so. And as our country is kind of notorious for doing, they were immediately looked down upon because, of course, and they celebrated their Christianity in strange ways. They brought over a Christmas tree, if you can believe such a thing. Why take a perfectly good tree, cut it down, carry it into your house, hang balls upon it, and then often tie little candles to it? This seems like pagan tree worship. And I'm not making a joke here. This is actually how a lot of the English American settlers, who are now the majority of this nation, viewed this tradition of Christmas trees. Not only was it different from them, not only did they think it was wrong, but they refused to see the Germans as Christian, as part of their spiritual family. Now, eventually, there's some softening up on this. You might wonder, what was the catalyzing event? Well, much like the white wedding dress became the norm in our country, it took the trendsetters of the time to see what the creme de la creme, sorry if I'm going to be using French, which I never use, right? Doing it first. A lot of us don't know white wedding dresses. You put that on partially as a display of your magnificent wealth. Look at me. I can afford white clothing. I got all the stains out. It's fantastic. Well, Christmas tree was carried in to British royalty by Queen Victoria's husband, King Albert. He came from Germany, and he wanted a magnificent, large, beautiful Christmas tree to share with his family. So he had it installed, it went above my head, and a picture was sketched or painted. There's beautiful, elegant, dripping with jewelry, Queen Victoria, and there's tall King Albert, and below the tree there are Christmas presents and kids with eager eyes staring at them. So this gets printed over in the US around 1870. And all of a sudden, everybody wants a Christmas tree. Within a couple of generations, it was the norm. In fact, it would become unusual to not have a Christmas tree. Where was all the talk about worshiping trees and such? Gone. Largely gone. You can still find it if you do Google searches on it today on the internet, as I discovered during a lot of my research. We still have some folks who are like, hey, how dare you? I'm the one doing Christmas right, and the rest of you are wrong. Now, I wanted to talk about some of our Christmas traditions that intersect with Advent themes week to week. Because you're not going to be seeing this during most of the month ahead of us. You're going to be seeing this on Sundays. But you are going to be seeing this every day, most of you. So why? Why do we do this? Besides the fact that some posh British people did it, and the rest of us thought, that looks fancy and nice, and I want to look fancy and nice and have an elegant Christmas tree in my house. Well, the tradition, of course, goes before King Albert, and it is from Germany. And the way that it was observed before, well, it has several legends around it. Raise your hand if you've heard this one. It was created by Martin Luther in the 1500s. Anybody hear this legend? One person, okay. So the story goes, Martin Luther, famous founding figure of the Reformation, he's strolling home on a lovely, clear winter night, and he looks beyond this row of evergreen trees, and you know what he sees behind them? Stars. Beautiful, twinkling stars. And for him, this is a breathtaking moment. It is a moment of beauty and light and life during the harsh, cold winter night. And he just wants to capture this moment and bring it home to his family. So he chops down a tree, puts it up in their house, ties candles to it, lights them all, and his family comes in bewildered, and thus the tradition of the Christmas tree was born. Except it might not have been that at all, right? Because there's another legend by about Saint Boniface. Everybody knows and loves Saint Boniface, right? Yep. No? Okay. So Saint Boniface, hundreds of years earlier, was strolling through the forest. And what did he see? He saw a clan of worshipers around an oak tree. Now, this is in Germany around the 900s or so. And they were worshiping traditional Germanic gods, many of whom we recognize from Norse mythology. Because if you were a child like me who just loved to geek out on things like this, you're like, oh yeah, Odin and Thor, Loki, right? Well, this group was wanting to make a beautiful sacrifice to Thor. And the oak tree is kind of Thor's tree because it's strong. So they have this lovely sacrifice. It turns out it's a human. And St. Boniface is not going to have any of this. So he chops down the oak tree, he frees the sacrifice, and wouldn't you know, once that tree's chopped down, everybody sees this beautiful little fir tree. Thus, the tradition of the Christmas tree was born. And in this story, it represents life. It represents being delivered from a gruesome fate. It represents eternal life, because Boniface saw the evergreen as shining out this hope for life that goes beyond this season. Now, neither of these have a lot of historical proof behind them. What we do have is during the late 800s, early 900s, the church loved to do plays. And around this time of year, they would do a play telling about the fall of humankind. You know, that lovely story that we always associate with Christmas. And so it was a simple production. Adam was present, Eve was present. I'm sure there was a serpent figure, and there was a little tree. And hanging in the tree were apples and wafers. And the apples represented the fruits of the knowledge of good and evil that tempted Adam and Eve, and the wafers represented communion. So this was supposed to be a story of life giving way to death, giving way to life again, right? Because that's how, in the Middle Ages, they viewed this story. Yes, we know death and we know evil, but we know life and we know good and we know life beyond life. And this story was so precious that many people wanted to remember it in their homes. So they started putting in little trees and tying not just apples to it. Eventually they tied glass orbs and various food things, including sweetmeats. And if you know what a sweetmeat is, you may be as turned off to this idea as I am. Gross. But it's a different time. And those who couldn't afford to get a little tree and do it all up nicely, they would get a little triangle. If you've ever seen a wooden triangle over in Germany, it may have roots to this practice. Now, what about all of this pagan declaration stuff? Well, it turns out we are indebted to pagan ancestors. And this is a part of the Christmas story a lot of us feel uncomfortable with. And I wish we wouldn't. I wish we would recognize that we come from somewhere. In a way, the Christmas tree is a form of indigenizing religion. It was the Germans indigenizing their faith. I think that's beautiful. I wish that was more common. I wish people all over the earth, if they were adopting Christianity, they could be free to make it their own, right? So the pagans did indeed value evergreens. It is said that many in the British islands would decorate with sprigs of evergreens. But the Germans also held it in high esteem. And so did the Romans. So did the Norse religions. It was held in high esteem everywhere that evergreens could be found. And so, to the Germanic and the Norse, they saw a connection between the evergreen and the sun god, Balder, Thor's brother. And Balder's health may have been seen as going a little tad south during the winter months as the days get shorter and the nights get longer. But they would look to the evergreen and they would remember it's going to get warmer. The night's not going to last forever. The ice is going to thaw. Our crops are going to grow again. Our pastures are going to be full. And soon, our animals are going to have their own children. And we will continue. We will endure like the evergreen. And that's the meaning it has for me. There are some connections to Christian scripture. You know, Paul talks about tree analogies. Jeremiah, in this passage, is talking about a branch coming up. He's connecting to imagery used by Isaiah. Isaiah talked about his nation during the colonization of the Babylonians as being a tree that had been hacked down, the stump of Jesse. And here, Jeremiah is saying, there's going to be a branch of David, the son of Jesse, springing forth. We are going to endure. We will continue on. The fallow lands will be filled. Our cups will be full. And in his hopeful vision, they will be self-governing once again. This is important to remember if you happen to have any Jewish friends, family, or neighbors, because there are several figures who end up fulfilling this kind of role, including the Maccabees. Jesus is not the only person that we look at as fulfilling this. He stands in a tradition. And for us, we look at this and say, God will make the world right one day. That's the hope that we project into a text like this. And that is what I see when I see the Christmas tree. I don't see a horrid, ghastly display of pageantry. I do see a potential temptation to keep up with the Joneses. That's true. I watched a Christmas movie yesterday with the kiddos, and the whole point was about keeping the Christmas spirit, which is, of course, being cheery and happy during Christmas time. I think that is not great. It's not a great tradition. Just be happy now for a month. But I do get some cheer from looking at the Christmas tree. I do appreciate this reminder that life goes on past the difficult moments. And I wonder how many of our ancestors suffered from seasonal depression, right? Maybe I would if my life and my family's life and my town's life was dependent on how hard and long the winter was. Well, friends, this Advent season, I invite you to cling to the hope of the evergreen. Whatever you're going through in your life, I hope that you can enjoy the goodness that is present now, like a Christmas tree. And remember that the hard stuff does not have the final word. It does not have to last forever. Life will go on beyond it. If not for us, then for those we love.